on to our second major type of learning, which is our operant conditioning. The operant conditioning is a little bit different to classical conditioning, and I believe I'll put some slides in on this. Our classical conditioning is association of a stimulus with an involuntary response. So little Albert and Pavlov's dogs were not actively involved in the learning process. The learning was not conscious. It was actually subconscious, whereas the stimulus was just associated with a response. Whereas in operant conditioning, the behavior is actually controlled by the outcomes or the consequences. So it's a consciously learnt behavior in operant conditioning. So for example, say if in high school, I know at my school, we had very strict uniform rules. So if somebody forgot their hat or was wearing the incorrect uniform on the incorrect day, then there would actually be a consequence of that. For example, they might get a detention. So the goal of that is the consequence. The detention is actually meant to shape their behavior. But the difference is the person undergoing the learning in operant conditioning, they actually have an active role in choosing their behavior. So for example, if a student received a detention, they actually have to choose, okay, I actually don't want to get a detention again. I actually need to change my behavior because this consequence, this outcome is or isn't desired. So our operant conditioning is about our learner actively making choices about their behavior based on the outcomes or consequences. Yeah, so coming back to our operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is a type of learning, like I said before, in which the behavior becomes controlled by its consequences, whether that be a reward or a punishment. So if I'm rewarded for sitting quietly in class, then I'm more likely to want to do that often. But if I'm punished for speaking in class when I'm not meant to, I'm more likely to not want to do that behavior as often. So an operant, which is where the name operant conditioning comes from. So an operant is a response that occurs without a stimulus. So our operant is just our behavior, our voluntary behavior, like what I was saying before. So it's controlled by the person or potentially animal performing the operant, the behavior. So the ABC of operant conditioning, this is what operant conditioning is. So our antecedent is the environment that makes the conditions right for the behavior to follow, and it can be reinforced or extinguished by its consequences. So we have our A, our B, and our C. So our antecedent, our environment, is the stimulus that prompts the response. Behavior is the voluntary response, and the consequence is the outcome. So let's go through a bit of an example to make that a little bit more sense. So if a parent was using the idea of operant conditioning to teach their children, for example, the antecedent, the stimulus that prompts the response, could potentially be if two siblings were fighting. So the antecedent, the environment, is right for the voluntary behavior response to follow. For example, if one of the siblings actually chose to hit their sibling rather than resolve the conflict constructively, that's actually the behavior that that child has consciously and voluntarily chosen. So again, we have our antecedent, our environment is a stimulus that prompts the response, which in our example is our behavior, our voluntary choice to hit. The consequence, which is the outcome, the parents might actually put the student in time, put the child in timeout. That could be the consequence. So the idea of this is that that consequence actually isn't desired. The child actually doesn't want to go to timeout. So the goal of that is to shape future behavior. So for example, next time a similar antecedent or environment comes up that prompts the response, instead of hitting the child might think, okay, last time I exhibited this behavior, I got put in timeout, which really was awful, and I don't actually want to have to do that again. So I'm going to voluntarily choose to maybe perhaps be kinder to my sibling rather than have to face the consequence if I choose to act in an inappropriate way again. So that's kind of the basic outline of our operant conditioning. So the whole thing with operant conditioning, like we said before, is that our consequences are actually controlled, our behavior, the outcome is actually controlled by its consequences and the outcomes. So our outcomes could be positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, or negative punishment. And these are a little bit confusing, but it's definitely really valuable and worthwhile being able to tell them apart, because these can make for really easy marks on multiple choice questions or short answer questions if you can just kind of grasp what the difference between each of them is. So a reinforcer, so looking at our here's my laser pointer. So looking at reinforcement. So a reinforcer is any stimulus, so the outcome, the consequence, that strengthens or increases the likelihood of a response or a behavior. So reinforcement, like what we have here, is any consequence that says, yes, I want to encourage this behavior. I want to do it again. A reinforcer says, I want you to learn that this is a good behavior and I want you to do it again. Looking across to our positive and our negative. So positive, in the case of both reinforcement and punishment, means that something is added. A stimulus or a consequence is added. And our negative means a stimulus or a stimulus is taken away. So our positive, yes, exactly, think plus, something is added, and our negative, something is taken away to shape the behavior in the desired way. So thinking back now to, let's look at positive reinforcement. So reinforcement, we want to increase the likelihood of a behavior. Yes, do it again, that is a good thing. So positive reinforcement, we're thinking, what could we add to reinforce a behavior? Well, a positive reinforcer would be something like a reward that strengthens the response by providing like a pleasant or satisfying consequence. Keep in mind that when we're talking about operant conditioning, a consequence isn't a bad thing. A consequence might not be timeout. A consequence can be iPad time. A consequence is just referring to the stimulus, the outcome that's trying to shape the behavior. So again, looking back to positive reinforcement, something positive, something desirable is added to increase the likelihood of a behavior. So for example, in a classroom, if a student is sitting really quietly, they might actually be rewarded with some iPad time. So next time in a class, the student might be thinking, oh, okay, last time that I actually did this behavior, last time that I was really good and I listened really well, I actually got rewarded with iPad time. So the goal of that is to actually reinforce the behavior to make the student want to do it again. Whereas negative reinforcement is, again, we have our negative. So that means something is taken away to reinforce, so to promote a behavior. So how do we take something away to promote a behavior? Well, it's taking away an unpleasant stimulus to increase the likelihood that the behavior will be repeated. So for example, if you are being told to clean your room, or a child is being told to clean their room but they don't want to, if a parent is nagging, the student might actually clean their room to get rid of the nagging. So the outcome of them cleaning their room is actually that the nagging, which is a negative stimulus, is actually taken away, which is to reinforce the behavior. So that means they're more likely to do that behavior again, because the reward, the thing to reinforce that behavior, was that a negative thing was taken away. So that's increasing the likelihood that a behavior will be repeated by taking away the negative stimulus. Moving down to punishment. So when we're looking at positive and negative punishment, we're looking at how can we reduce the likelihood of the behavior. So positive punishment, positive, remember coming back to thinking something is added. How can we add something to reduce the likelihood of a behavior? Well, that would be adding an unpleasant stimulus so a child knows that they shouldn't engage in that behavior again. So, for example, adding nagging or yelling. If a child does something really dangerous or really unsafe, a parent might yell or tell them off or something like that. So something is being added so they know not to participate in that behavior again. So yeah, like I said before, like a parent scolding their child for fighting with their sibling. Whereas our negative punishment, think negative, something is taken away to try and reduce the likelihood of a behavior. So again, we're thinking, if I want to send the message that what they've done is bad, how can I make sure that they don't do it again? When we're thinking of negative, it's what can I take away to reduce the likelihood of this behavior occurring again? So for example, that would be taking away a positive stimulus. So hey, because you've actually fought with your sibling and actually behaved really unkindly, they might actually lose iPad privileges. So that's something that they desire. It's a desired or positive stimulus that's being taken away, that they're actually missing out on because they've done a behavior that they shouldn't have. So yeah, zooming back out to the big picture again, our reinforcers are to encourage the likelihood of a desired behavior, whereas our punishment is don't do it again. And whether that be through positive, adding a pleasant or unpleasant stimulus, or negative, removing a positive or a negative stimulus to encourage, either reinforcement or punishment. So that's our classical versus our operant.